Hello and welcome to this C# programming tutorial video here on Table Flip Games. I'm Tommy Thompson, and in this second tutorial video we're going to look at writing our first ever C# program. But it's going to be a little more than that, as we look at understanding how compiling and executing our program is achieved and talking a little more about what's actually happening in what is ultimately a rather simple programming exercise. If you're new to programming, then this might be a lot to take in at first in terms of the theory, but try and keep it in mind as you work through later videos. The code itself is very straightforward and you should be able to get this up and running pretty quickly. A quick heads up, we'll be using the Notepad++ program and some of the developer tools used by Visual Studio for this first program. Be sure to check out the previous video on setting up your computer to run all of this software. So let's start with this empty file in the Notepad++ editor, and what I'm going to do is write a short program that simply writes the phrase "Hello World" to the output console. Now, a Hello World program is very common, and typically if you're going to start writing code in a given programming language, you'll go through a Hello World example. This is pretty useful practice, given it allows for a programmer who's not familiar with a new language understand one of the simplest possible exercises. To print a message to an output window and prove to yourself that programming language is actually working for you. So let's make this happen. I'm going to write the code out in front of you and then you can follow along and type it out yourself. So let's start with the opening line using system, capital S, and a semicolon at the end. Now I'm going to gloss over this for the time being, but this is a really important line for this program to work, so make sure you type it out in the same style as I have here. Following on from this, I'm going to move down a little bit and then type public class hello world, capital H, capital W. Now, notice that I write the phrase hello world without a space between them. That's because I just created a class, and its name is hello world. All of our code is written inside classes in C#, they each have a name. You can't have any spaces in the name. So generally you write the name in its entirety like so. We're going to be just doing this and then not really worrying about it at first, but I'm going to come back to talking about this in a lot more detail in later tutorials as to what this whole class thing's all about, because this is actually the backbone of how an object-oriented language works. Next up, I'm going to add a carriage return and then place a single opening curly brace. And then I'm going to put another one over here, and you can actually see that it highlighted it on my machine as red, which is actually kind of useful. The brace means that any code that's part of the Hello World class will exist between the opening one and the closing one. Next up's undoubtedly the longest and most complicated line of code that exists in this program, so here we go. First up, I'm going to press Tab on the left side of my keyboard to bring the text cursor in a little bit, and then we're going to write out this line right here. Public static void main with a capital M, open curly bracket, string with a opening and then closing square bracket, args, closing bracket. So public static void main, capital M, open bracket, string, opening and closing square bracket, args, closing bracket. That's a big one. If yours looks like mine, odds are you've done it right. Now let's place another opening brace and closing brace underneath it. And then I'm going to tab in again. And I'm going to write the most important line, the bit that we actually need in order to do what we want to do. Console dot, it's a full stop, write line, note capital C, capital W, capital L. Opening bracket, opening quotation mark, hello world. I'm going to put an exclamation mark in there because I want to make it dramatic. Then another quotation mark, a closing bracket, and a semicolon. Boom, done it. If your code looks like mine, then awesome, we've now actually written some code. Hooray! Take a moment to double check you did it exactly the same way as me before we proceed further, and then after that we're going to save the file, compile it, and run it. Alright, so now that the code's written, we want to try and run it. Now if you recall from our introductory video, we have written this in high-level language that the robot overlords just don't understand, so we need to run the compiler to translate the code into an executable that's ready to run on the computer. Now in future videos, we're going to let Visual Studio do all the heavy lifting, but for now we're going to do it ourselves. That way you begin to understand how the compiling and executing process works. First things first, need to save the file. head up, file, and I'm going to click save. And then I've got a bunch of stuff here on my desktop, and that's where I'm going to save it. And I'm going to call it Hello World. Spelling. Exactly the same name as the class. And then I'm going to, instead of a text file, I'm going to use .cs, which is a C# source file. Click save, and you'll note that this actually works correctly if you start getting changes to certain words in the text. Not all of them, but just some of them. This is because when we've changed it, Notepad++ is now treating this as a C# source file and recognises what we call keywords in the language. And these are going to be really important, and I'll actually talk a little bit more, some of them in this video, some of them in later videos, about what these keywords actually do. Next up, we need to find our tool to do the compilation. If you head into the Start menu, and then go down and look for Visual Studio, your Visual Studio installation, you can see I've got two here, but I'm going to use 2017, and I'm looking for Developer Command Prompt for VS 2017. I'm going to open that up. And it opens up. Now, if you're a little bit older like me, this looks really similar to a DOS prompt, but you know, that's like super old, nobody remembers that, so you know. And it started in my Visual Studio installation folder. Some of you might be familiar with this type of window and have seen it before, but make sure you're using the developer command prompt that's in the Visual Studio installation and not the regular command prompt that's already part of Windows, as it won't have the compiler tools prepared what we need. So now, it's currently sitting in this Program Files Microsoft Visual Studio 2017 Community folder. I need it to be in the desktop folder in order to then run my code. So now I need to get where So in order to get to where I put the file, I'm going to use two commands. CD, which allows me to change the directory, and dir to check a file to check what files are in a given directory. I say directories, but often we mean folders. Folders are essentially the same thing, we just name them differently depending on your context. I often see them as directories, but we typically refer to them as folders nowadays. So I'm going to use CD, and then every time I do it for the first couple of times, I'm just going to use ... and that's going to move me up one folder out of the file hierarchy, because I want to just get to the C drive. Now I can just type CD ... CD ... or you can click up alternatively to then replay an old command. So here we are, I'm back at the C drive. And if I type dir, I'm looking for a folder there called users. So I'm going to type cd space and then users. And if I type dir again, I can see t2 tho, and that's my username. So cd t2 tho. You'll have a different username because it's whatever username you set up for yourself on your computer. Type dir again. There's the desktop. I type cd desktop. I type dir again. There's a bunch of other stuff in there, but the most important thing is helloworld.cs. Now we're going to try and run the compiler. To do that, we type csc space followed by the name of the file, helloworld.cs, and hit enter. It's thinking about it, and it's done. That didn't take long at all. Awesome. Also, the fact that it did that means that it worked. Now, if you got a message here telling you something maybe went wrong, you could get all sorts of variety of different problems that occur, and that's when the compiler's telling you you made a mistake in your code. I'll simulate this myself, actually. So if I go over and maybe remove the args there, that's a popular example. Somebody might have missed that. And I compile it. I get error CS1001 identifier expected. God, that's not very particular help. It's not really helpful, is it? So yeah, I need to make sure I type in args here, and then I'll try it again. And I just used up on the keyboard there in order to just rerun that same command. Now, if this has worked correctly, and if it hasn't, take a minute, double check, have a look that you've written it exactly the way that I've written it there. Make sure that all the spaces are in the right places. You've not used a curly brace instead of a normal brace, or a square brace instead of a curly brace, or whatever. Also check that you've got upper and lowercase letters in the right place where you need them. It's actually really important that we get all them correctly. And it'll make more sense to you in due course anyway. But if you've got it working, we go back in here and we type dir, you'll note we now have helloworld.exe. That is the product of running the compiler. Woohoo! It actually compiled successfully. Now, to run the program, we can go back in here and just simply type the name of the executable. We don't need to write the .exe part at the end of it. So, hello world, and Hooray! It says hello world on the screen. So what did all this mean? Let's break it down line by line and you'll get a feeling for how this language works and what exactly the code I wrote meant when I ran it. And of course, you wrote it too, so we can just celebrate in this together. Let's go back in. The first line, using system, is actually a request to qualify the system namespace as part of our project. This is actually meant to speed things up a little bit more for later on in the code, as my console.writeLine command, you can see this one here, is actually referencing the system namespace. So I loaded it in here. What's important is that whenever we want to use the console writeLine command, we need to make sure we've wrote the using system command at the top. So that's pretty important. Remember that one. Next up, we actually needed to create the class. And the class declaration and its braces after it are going to be covered in a later video. However, the key thing is that it's a publicly accessible class called Hello World. Again, this is a point that will make more sense later. Next up, we actually wrote the main method. Now, the main method in C# is a means by which if you want to have something come out on a console, you have to write a main method, and that's going to be the starting point of the executable. And if I want to write a console application like this, I'm going to have a main method because when I call helloworld.exe, it calls that method and it runs all the code that's inside it. We'll come back to what that means in a later video. Essentially, that's a set of parameters that I'm passing in. And then lastly, I actually called the important line of code. This entire program only has one instruction in it. And so when helloworld.exe runs, it says run everything that is contained within these two braces. And there is one line of code. And that's it. We run the writeLine command of the console class, which is designed to push a line of text out to the console. And we decided it would be the phrase hello world, as you can see in the quotation marks. And you can make that whatever you like. It can just be, you know, fish. Now, of course, when I do that, I have to go away and recompile it. I can't, if I actually just run hello world, it just says hello world because I saved the file, but I haven't recompiled the executable. So if I just click up a couple of times on my keyboard, CSC hello world.cs, it's recompiled successfully. And then when I run, oh god, whoops, ran the wrong way. I run hello world, fish, fish, fish. So try that out, try mucking around, try putting different things in there, just for giggles, just so that way you can say, hey, I managed to write a program that can say different things, but every time you change it, you've got to go back and recompile it. CSC hello world.cs. Hello world. Hello world. All right. So this is just your first program, and it's not doing anything too exciting just yet, but that's cool. This is just the first video. We've got a long way to go. But if you've got this far, you've actually wrote your first program. And if you've never written a program before in C# or any language, this is a victory. So take a moment, pat yourself in the back. I'd pat myself in the back, but I've written way too many hello worlds to really merit, actually being rewarded for this. And that's it for this video. As we move into my next video, we're going to start looking at how to expand this by being a little more interesting through use of variables and expressions. In the meantime, be sure to check out all the other game dev tutorials we provide right here on the Table Flip Games channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.